You think demons are fallen angels. They're not. You've seen the word in movies, heard it in church, maybe even prayed against one. And when someone asks where they come from, the answer is almost always the same. They're the angels who fell with the devil. It's what you've been told your whole life. And that answer has a hole in it. It doesn't match the text. Because the Bible treats the angels who fell one way and the spirits that get inside people another way. They're two different things. And the moment you pull them apart, a door opens underneath Genesis 6 that no one told you to open. Look at what each one does. One is locked away, in chains, in the dark, waiting for judgment. The other is loose, right now, hungry, looking for a body. Almost everyone confuses the two. And that's why the origin of a demon is older and far stranger than what you grew up believing. It didn't come from some preacher's imagination. It came from a book that was left out of the Bible, but that the Bible itself quotes. A book that tells you, by name and in detail, what was left behind when the floodwaters went down. To understand what was left behind, I owe you 90 seconds of what came before. If you saw the first video, you already know. If you didn't, stay with me, because without this, none of the rest holds together. There was a time before the flood when something came down out of the sky. The Book of Enoch calls them the Watchers. There were 200 of them. They came down on a mountain called Hermon, swore an oath to each other, and took human women. From those unions, something was born that was never supposed to exist. The giants, and forget the picture in your head. This wasn't a big, muscular man. It was a new category, half its blood from here, half from up there, a race that ate everything in sight, swept through the cattle, swept through the crops, and when nothing was left, turned on people. Next to them, Enoch says, an ordinary human was like a grasshopper. That's why the flood came. It wasn't punishment for people who sinned. That had always existed. It was surgery, cutting out what had gone rotten before it took over everything. And the Watchers, the ones who came down, they were chained and locked away, waiting for judgment. The waters rose, the world drowned, the giants died. One family was left, a bloodline the poison hadn't reached yet. And the world started over from zero. This is where almost everyone closes the story. Over. God cleaned it. Page turned, except for one detail. The flood killed the bodies. But what lived inside those bodies wasn't made of flesh. The bones went to the bottom. What lived in them did not. The bodies died. And what was living inside them? Before I answer that, I have to clear up a confusion you've probably carried your whole life, and it has to get out of the way first. Almost every Christian treats fallen angel and demon as the same thing, the same crew of the devil, just with two names. You hear, there was a demon in that person, and you hear, it was a fallen angel, and you picture the same figure in both sentences. And look, it makes sense at first glance. An angel rebelled, fell, became God's enemy. Why two names for one creature? Watch closely, because this is exactly where it all gets tangled. If the two words are the same thing, take them and try to read the whole Bible that way. It doesn't fit. Nowhere does it fit. And this isn't a theologian's argument. It has weight for your prayer life. Because if you don't know what a demon is, you can spend your whole life praying against the wrong enemy, aiming at one thing and fighting another. So let's separate the two with the text itself. Only what's written. Start with the angels who fell. The Watchers, the ones who came down on Hermon. Where are they now? The Bible answers, and it doesn't answer softly. Open the letter of Jude, verse 6. The angels who abandoned their own place, God has kept in eternal chains, under darkness, waiting for judgment. Peter says it again, almost word for word. The second letter of Peter, chapter 2, verse 4. God did not spare the angels who sinned. He handed them over to darkness in chains, held until the day of judgment. And the Book of Enoch, chapter 10, shows you the scene from the inside. Azazel bound, thrown into a pit in the dark, covered with rock and shadow, left there until the day of fire. 3 witnesses, the same sentence. The angels who fell are locked away. Now think about what that does to your idea of a demon, because the demons in the Bible aren't locked anywhere. They walk free, open any gospel. They get inside people, speak through their mouths, torment, get cast out by Jesus, and go off looking for another body. They're everywhere, loose, active, with a will of their own. The 2 pictures don't fit in the same frame. One group is chained since before the flood, never leaving the dark. The other is out in the open, walking the streets, getting inside people in front of everyone. There's no way it's the same creature at the same time in 2 places. So you're left with one conclusion, and it's an uncomfortable one. If the angels who fell are locked away, then they are not the ones getting inside people. The demon that torments a human being is something else, a second category, something nobody ever introduced you to because you were taught there was only one. There's a second kind of spirit loose in the world, and it isn't an angel. So what is it? Where did this thing come from? The book, the Bible itself, quotes answers, by name and in detail, and what it says is stranger than any angel. Go back to the giant, but this time, not to how it lived, to how it died. Think about what that being was at the root. Half of it came from above, from the spirit of the watchers. The other half came from here, from human flesh. 2 natures that were never meant to share one body. Creation had no place set aside for it. It wasn't an angel, it wasn't a human. It was a third thing that nobody planned and nobody wanted. Now the body dies. In the flood or of old age, doesn't matter. The flesh rots. The bone turns to dust. And here comes the question that changes everything. Where does what lived inside it go? When a person dies, their soul has somewhere to go. It has a destination, a rest, a place that receives it. But this being wasn't a person. Its human half was mixed with something that came from outside. And what lived inside it, the moment the body fell, discovered something terrible. It had no home. Heaven wasn't its place. The spirit of heaven belongs in heaven, and this one was born down here out of flesh. The door above was shut, and the earth, the rest of the dead, didn't receive it either, because it wasn't an ordinary dead man. It wasn't a human soul going where human souls go, so it stayed. Stuck here, no body, no destination, no rest. That's what the Book of Enoch describes in chapters 15 and 16. The spirit that comes out of the dead giant doesn't go out with the flesh. It keeps going. And Enoch gives a detail that makes your skin crawl. This spirit is hungry and it's thirsty. But it's not hunger for food because it doesn't eat. It's hunger for what it lost. It lost the flesh. It lost the weight of existing. It lost the feel of the ground under its feet, of touching, of being in the world. It remembers what it was like to have a body, and it wants it back. And there's only one thing in the whole world that quiets that hunger, a body that isn't its own. To get inside someone, take over, use it, feel again what it was to have flesh, even if it's borrowed, even if it's only for a little while. Stop and read that again, slowly. A spirit with no body, starving for what it lost, wandering the earth, looking for someone to live inside. You've heard this description before, in movies, in church, in ghost stories. An unclean spirit, the thing that gets inside a person, the thing Jesus cast out. Enoch isn't inventing a new monster. It's handing you the birth certificate of something you already knew by its nickname. The demon wasn't created a demon. It was born from a race that should never have existed, and it became a demon the instant the body died, and it had nowhere to go. The origin of a demon isn't an angel rebelling up in heaven. It's a giant rotting in the ground. And I know what you're thinking. This is Enoch. not the Bible. That's fair. So watch what the Gospels show these spirits doing, because it's exactly this. Right about now, you're telling yourself, this is Enoch, and Enoch isn't the Bible. It doesn't count. Fair enough, it's an honest objection, so let's do this. Close the Book of Enoch. Forget it for 5 minutes. Open only the Bible, the one sitting in your house, and watch how a demon behaves inside it. Because if the behavior the Bible shows is the same one Enoch described, then the idea stops being some apocryphal theory. It becomes a reading of the text itself. And then the conversation changes sides. Go to Mark chapter 5. The possessed man of the Gerasenes. Jesus arrives, and what lives inside that man speaks. He asks its name, and the thing answers, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Not one spirit, hundreds, crammed into a single body. And stop right there for a second. Why so many of them packed in, fighting over one man? Why the scramble for a single body of flesh? Keep reading, because here comes the part nobody notices. Jesus is about to cast them out, and they beg. But they don't beg to stay in the man. They beg to go into the pigs. There was a herd right there, almost 2,000 of them. And they plead, "Send us into the pigs, let us go into them." Stop and measure the size of that. If a demon were a glorious angel from heaven, why would it beg to live inside a pig? Why stoop so low? There's only one answer. It needs a body, any body, even an animal's. It's the same hunger Enoch described now in front of Jesus in the letters of the Bible. And there's one thing these demons are afraid of. Luke tells the same scene, chapter 8, verse 31, and records what they asked. They begged Jesus not to send them into the abyss. The abyss, the same pit where the watchers are already locked. They're loose, and that's exactly their terror, being shut down there. And notice the logic of it. The one who begs not to be imprisoned is the one who's still free. 2 destinations, 2 creatures. And there's the most revealing line of all. Matthew tells this same encounter, chapter 8, verse 29, and keeps a sentence the others left out. The demons scream at Jesus, "Have you come to torment us before the time?" Before the time. They know there's a day marked. They know there's a judgment set aside for them, and that it hasn't come yet. They're free for now, but they know the clock is running against them. Put the 3 together, a desperate hunger for a body, terror of the abyss, and the awareness of a judgment that hasn't arrived. It's the exact portrait of the spirit Enoch described, trait for trait. Only this time it isn't Enoch talking, it's Mark, it's Luke, it's Matthew. The Bible shows you what a demon does. Enoch tells you where it came from, the 2 pieces locked together and become one thing. But locking them together opens a bigger hole. If the flood cleaned the world and the bodies of the giants all went to the bottom, then explain this to me. Why is there still a demon loose for Jesus to cast out? The flood cleaned the world. The bodies of the giants all went to the bottom. By logic, the spirits should have gone down with the flesh. End of the race, end of the plague, water over everything. Except that's not what happened. They kept going. No body, but they kept going. The Book of Jubilees, chapter 10, tells a scene that gives you chills. After the waters went down, these spirits started closing in on Noah's grandchildren. The old man was still alive, and he watched his own descendants being tormented, pushed toward ruin. The plague had survived the flood, and now it was bearing down on the only family that was left. Noah did the only thing he could. He prayed. He asked God to imprison those things, to lock them all away, to pull his children out from under them. And here comes the part nobody tells you. God was going to lock them all up. The order had already been given. But there was a request in the middle of the road. The chief of those spirits has a name. Jubilees calls him Mastema. Mastema means hostility, enmity. He's the one who went to God with a petition. He asked not to be locked away with the rest. He asked God to leave a portion of the spirits loose under his command to keep testing the human race. not to destroy everyone, to sift, to be the test, and God granted it. He ordered most of them imprisoned, but he left a fraction free. Jubilees even gives a number, 1 out of every 10. 9 parts locked, 1 part loose, and I'll warn you now, because I know you're going to want to argue this in the comments. That proportion changes depending on the version you read, but the picture is the same. The majority imprisoned, a remainder free, loose in the world, and with permission. Stop for a second on that word. Permission. What was left isn't loose by accident, and not because it escaped. It's loose because it was authorized to stay, with a job to do, and the job is you, and I already know what you're about to say. But that's Jubilees, another apocryphal book. So close Jubilees too. Look at what your Bible says, on its own. The first letter of Peter, chapter 3, verses 19 and 20. Peter talks about spirits that are imprisoned, and he says when they were imprisoned, in the days of Noah. Your own Bible confirms that there are spirits locked away since the time of the flood. Jubilees only answers the question the Bible left hanging. Why not all of them? Enoch gave you the origin. Jubilees gave you the sentence. And the Bible confirms both ends. Nobody here is contradicting Scripture. They're filling in the blanket left. So here's where it lands. A fraction of those spirits was never imprisoned. It crossed the flood, crossed the centuries, crossed the Gospels, and arrived intact at today. It's here right now, and it has a name in your everyday life. If what came out of the giants was never imprisoned, and a portion is still loose, then this stops being old history. It stops being a thing from before the flood. It gets an address, and the address is today. It's right now. It's near you. Maybe nearer than you'd like. Look at what Paul wrote. The letter to the Ephesians, chapter 6, verse 12. He says, your fight is not against flesh and blood. Read it again, slowly. Not against flesh and blood. Meaning your real enemy isn't the person who hurt you, isn't the neighbor, isn't the circumstance. Paul is saying that behind what you can see, there's something else. He calls them principalities, powers, the rulers of the darkness, forces you don't see, but that are right there in the dark at work. And Jesus, when the disciples asked what the end would look like, pointed to one single time. Matthew chapter 24, verse 37. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be. Of all the eras he could have named, he chose that one. The era of the giants, the era of the contamination. Why that one? Because what Paul describes isn't a figure of speech. That fraction that was never imprisoned, starving, with no body, with permission to test the human race, is exactly what he says you're up against. It's not a metaphor for temptation. It's the thing that was left behind. The same spirits, the same ones as always, still doing the job Mastema asked to do. That permission from before the flood was never cancelled. It's still in force, and that's why Paul tells you to put on armor and not to relax. And the warning from Jesus gets even heavier when you understand why he picked the days of Noah. It wasn't because of ordinary sin. Sin was always there. It was because of what was being done. The mixing, taking what belonged to one nature and crossing it with another. Scrambling the line of what was supposed to be human. Now lift your head and look outside. We've learned to reach into the gene, to cross one species with another, to edit what gets born, to mix what was never meant to mix. I'm not telling you what that is. I'm telling you the script looks too familiar. Jesus didn't say like the days of war or like the days of famine. He said like the days of Noah, same game, new tools. And when I connected these dots, there's one detail that gave me chills, a detail on a map, a matter of place. The mountain where all of this began didn't stay back in the past. Jesus went there on purpose. And what he did at the foot of it changes how you read the end of this story. Go back to the very beginning, the mountain Hermon. That's where the watchers came down. That's where they swore the oath. That's where the border between heaven and earth was broken open for the first time. Hermon is ground zero, the exact spot where the contamination entered the world. Hold that name. Now jump 2,000 years forward. Jesus is with his disciples, and he decides to take them to one specific place. Not just anywhere. He took them to Caesarea Philippi. And look where Caesarea Philippi sits, at the foot of Mount Hermon, right at the base of that same mountain, and there's more. In that city there was a grotto the pagans worshipped, and they called that hole the gate to the world of the dead. The gate of hell, carved into the rock, dark water poured out of it, and they said it had no bottom. That's where false gods were worshipped, at the base of the mountain where the angels fell. The disciples knew exactly where they were standing. It was in that place, and no other, that Jesus turned to his disciples and nailed the line, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." Stop and feel the weight of that. He didn't say it in the temple. He didn't say it in a beautiful place. He went to the scene of the crime. He went to ground zero of the fall, stood on the gate of hell, and right there in the enemy's face declared its defeat. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. 3 things stay with you after this video, and they change the word demon in your head forever. The first, a demon is not a fallen angel. The fallen angel is locked away, in chains, in the dark, waiting for judgment. A demon is something else. It's the spirit of a dead giant with no body and no home, hunting for flesh to take. The second, if it's still here, it's because it was allowed to be. God imprisoned the majority and released a fraction under Mastema to sift the human race. What was left didn't escape. It was authorized. The third, this isn't a distant prophecy. When Jesus said like the days of Noah, he wasn't talking about a dead past. He was pointing at a door. And the name on that door might be your own address, not at the end of the world, on your street. You just saw where demons come from and why a part of them is still loose, not the fallen angel, what was left of the giant, and it's here with permission to this day. Now I want to hear from you. After all of this, which side are you on? Is a demon the spirit of a dead giant with no body, hunting for flesh to take? Or are you still with what most people preach, that demon and fallen angel are the same thing? Don't answer off the top of your head. Pick a side and tell me which verse convinced you. I read the comments and I answered the strongest ones. And so I know you made it this far, that you watched the whole thing. Write one word. Write Mastema. Whoever writes Mastema, I'll know you were paying attention. But don't leave yet. There's one last thing, and this one is going to keep you up at night. Remember I told you the fallen angels are locked away, chained in the dark, separate from the demons. I set them aside this whole video on purpose. Hold on to that, because there's a group the whole world is about to meet, and the name they're going to give it might be the biggest lie of the last days. Look at what's happening right now. This week, there's a new Spielberg movie in theaters about the government hiding that aliens are real. And Spielberg himself went on television and said he truly believes they're already here. And it's not just a movie. The United States government keeps dropping file after file on UFOs, dumping it all in the world's lap. And suddenly, everyone's ready to believe in visitors from the stars. As it was in the days of Noah. The Bible warned that a deception like this would come at the end. A powerful one. It's in the second letter to the Thessalonians, chapter 2. And here's the question that opens the next video. What if these aliens don't come from any planet? What if they're the fallen angels in new clothing, and the greatest trap of the end is the whole world calling what fell from the sky a visitor from the stars? In the next video, I'll show you why, and why the Bible already knew. Genesis buried a lot, and not everything that fell from the sky is dead. I haven't finished digging it up.